Hey everybody, it's Mr. Fabeck here, and this is Fabiology, and today we are going to talk about energy flow and how energy flows throughout an ecosystem. So a couple terms that we want to know right off the bat is we want to know ecology. Ecology is the study of nature's economy, or basically all the organisms and their interactions between each other within an environment. When we use the term ecosystem, again, we're talking about all the living and non-living aspects of an area, and specifically an area of a study, right? So when we talk about ecosystems, we're talking about what we see in the picture here, something like an African savanna, a rainforest, an ocean, a pond, a lake, any sort of one unit of focus. But when we talk about ecology in general, we're talking about multiple areas or just concepts that fall within that. So energy flow is our main topic. So we want to know how energy is flowing, or how things are able to use this energy and gain it throughout the ecosystem. So let's just start with the very foundation, is a producer. So a producer is the lowest level on a food chain. And when you think of producers, you want to think of plants. Plants and algae and maybe even some bacteria like photosynthetic bacteria. All of these are able to produce their own food. So when we talk about autotrophs, we're talking about plants, because auto means self and troph means feeding. So we're talking about self-feeders. So again, producers are all plants. And how do plants get their energy? Is, well, from photosynthesis. So we already know that photo means light and synthesis is producing, so using sunlight to produce energy. So this is one of the state standards that we want to understand, is that we know the equation in both words and symbols, and we can see in our picture here how that works. So we, as humans, we know that we breathe out CO2, okay? So CO2, water, and energy, in this case what we can see is the sunlight energy, is going to produce energy for the plant, and it produces it in the form of sugar, and that sugar will then be broken down later in the plant for its own resources, and it also produces oxygen. So carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight make glucose and oxygen gas. Those are the things you want to write down for sure as a very foundation for photosynthesis. This diagram also really shows us what we call our reactants, things that are going in and reacting, and then things that are being produced. Okay, so our reactants and products. So knowing that we have producers with the foundation of our energy flow, we also have consumers. So consumers are gaining energy from the environment. So again, you want to think of animals and even some bacteria that are not using photosynthesis. And we have a couple different terms that we can also throw into consumers. You may be familiar with heterotrophs. Hetero means different again, so they feed on different things. So they're feeding on something else, like these lions. These are carnivores, right? Lions are eating meat, so they're carnivores, and they're eating this giraffe here. They are a heterotroph. This elk here is a heterotroph as well, and it is a herbivore, and it's eating plants here. But we also have things that are omnivores, and omnivores can eat both plant and animals. So that would be like you and me. I'm an omnivore. I like strawberries, and I like salads, and I like to eat that delicious juicy cheeseburger. And we can think of, in the natural world, like insects are considered an animal, right? So a bird that eats berries, seeds, and bugs would be considered an omnivore, or a bear that eats fish and berries, and so on, right? There's a lot of different things that you can do with omnivores, just as long as they're eating both plants and animals. So knowing these terms right now is going to make more sense later when we show how this energy is flowing. So if producers make the energy themselves, well, how do heterotrophs do this? The heterotrophs have to consume this food, and then from the food we release it and make ATP. Okay, so it's similar, like we put gas in the car and then we do this combustion, and we make our energy to make our car go. So again, this is what we want to write down for what's called cellular respiration, where we're taking sugar and oxygen gas and we're making carbon dioxide water, and energy. So very, very similar idea, except instead of going into our chloroplast, because we don't have chloroplast, right? Heterotrophs don't have this. We have mitochondria, our powerhouse of the cell. So the mitochondria is going to break this down through a process of glycolysis and the Krebs cycle and all of that to ultimately produce this ATP. So interesting enough, our last one for photosynthesis was taking CO2, water, and sun energy and making oxygen gas and sugar. Now we have the reverse reaction of sugar and oxygen gas making carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So we have two different ideas here, but ultimately they kind of work together, right? You could theoretically just switch that arrow the other way around depending on if you're talking about a producer or a consumer. So let's get to how we show this. Food diagrams, like a food chain or a food web, are very basic diagrams, and they're showing how energy is flowing throughout some sort of ecosystem. And a food web is way more complex. Think of a spider web. We have lots of different lines going all over the place, connecting things. So a food web is showing multiple interactions and multiple connections, because you have to think, these animals are going to be interacting with not just one plant itself. It wants to find food and survive, just like what Darwin told us, so wherever it can get it. So the big thing to think about, and this is what's going to be most confusing, is you have to draw the arrows where the energy goes. You're not drawing Hui 2, you're drawing where the energy goes. So in a sense, we are drawing what's being eaten, but we're drawing where that energy goes. So in a basic food chain, think of it like links. In a chain here, we have our sun, our ultimate source of all energy, going to the plants. The plants are doing photosynthesis and producing those sugars, being eaten by a grasshopper, being eaten by a frog, being eaten by a snake, being eaten by a hawk. So we have the energy flow going from sun all the way to hawk, and we can see that very basic interaction. And again, notice the arrows are going to where the energy is going, because obviously the sun is not eating grass, correct? And so we're showing where the energy is going. Now, a food web, I know, looks a little bit more complicated. This would be a basic food web of, let's say, a lake ecosystem. But we can see multiple interactions, right? We can see all these small fish being eaten by this largemouth bass, so their energy is going into the bass. The same thing, this swan is eating some of these smaller organisms, so on and so on, and then the fish the fish is hopefully being eaten by this angler here. So with food webs, we want to be able to look at multiple interactions. So what I would do is I'd pause the video here, and I want you to think about a bear, a hawk, a chipmunk, beaver, grouse or some sort of pheasant, some sort of ground bird, butterfly, grass seeds, berries, deer, and fungus. Try and make a food web right now with this. Okay, so just pause the video. Hopefully you came up with something that looks a little like this, right? I mean, yours obviously might be different than mine, but we can see all these interactions and multiple interactions, the grass with the butterfly and the marmot, the chipmunk eating these seeds, and then also multiple things being eaten by different ideas here. We'll come back to this idea of what a decomposer is in just a minute. But this also explains our pyramids of biomass. This is something we'll come across later, but as we think about energy, if producers produce, they're making their own food, so it's a lot easier. They can produce thousands of calories of energy, right? Well, ultimately, as you go up the food chain, there's going to be less and less of those individuals. So if we look at our food energy pyramid here, we can see the energy available becomes less, because we're using that energy to digest the food, chase after the food, break it down, and convert it. And so you'd have to eat a lot more. And the environment, what we talk about with Darwin, is that there's this competition, so we don't have that ability to do that. And so unfortunately, some of us are not going to be able to get that food, and we're not going to be able to survive. So Interesting enough, we can see these biomass pyramids naturally happen in ecosystems where grass and our producers have a higher level of biomass or higher amounts on this planet, and as you go up to larger predators, it starts to become less and less. And it's that idea that we don't have enough energy to support those larger individuals. So the last part of an ecosystem is the idea that once you take it away from those individuals, you have to be able to get it back into the environment. Otherwise, it's not going to survive. The environment will just die off. There won't be enough. And so how do we do that? We have decomposers. So decomposers, think of fungus and mold. We're thinking of these things that break down and recycle the nutrients or recycle the carbon and all the sugars and the water and whatever else is left in that individual back into the ecosystem. So we have a variety of different mushrooms and fungus here, and mushrooms and fungus are kind of cool. There's so many out there, we don't even know what they do, but they have some pretty cool names. Like this one's called Dead Man's Fingers. Kind of looks like someone's just crawling out of the ground, being decomposed at the last second. And then we have our Minnesota State Morel here, ready to decompose and recycle back into our beautiful ecosystem. So, last question for practice is I want you to create a food web on your own with whatever environment you want to do, but I want you to include 3 producers, 3 herbivores. Remember, those are those individuals who are eating only plants, an omnivore, 2 carnivores or our meat eaters, and 1 decomposer, and try and show as many interactions as possible. Feel free to make it as big as possible too and add more and more to your food web. It will be much, much better for you. So thank you and good luck with your food webs and understanding how all this energy is all connected and it's all this recycling process. Bye everybody.